In Vinci, the artist's native village, Peter Hohenstadt, an expert on Leonardo, goes to the library which holds exact reproductions of the Tuscan master's codexes.
Pinxit Mea, it's a text which the Latin is not 100% correct. It could be very easily read. Mea means probably myself, yeah, could be, yeah, and Pinxit, he has painted myself, could be a play, yeah, to saying that I is the one who's talking, but is also the one who is on the painting. But the Latin translation doesn't really support it perfectly.
We know that the artist wrote most of the time in Tuscan dialect. The illegitimate son of a Florentine notary, he couldn't attend the university. His Latin was self-taught. Could his limited knowledge of Latin explain the strange grammatical form of Pinxit Mea? In Monteforte Irpino, a meeting is scheduled with Silvana Giuliano, a criminal handwriting expert. The handwriting analysis is based upon a comparison of various writing samples. Silvana Giuliano works from reproductions of the Atlanticus Codex, which contains over 1,000 pages of Leonardo da Vinci's notes.
The codexes represented an extremely rich source for us because they were from his hand and written in total spontaneity. In graphology, the handwriting must be spontaneous to be analyzed. We couldn't have wished for better source material.
Each letter is blown up to 40 to 100 times. Each letter is blown up 40 to 100 times with a microscope, so its characteristic details can be studied. These details are the product of fleeting and spontaneous gestures, which are beyond the writer's control. They make each writing sample unique and identifiable.
These characteristics, these minute details that we come across in certain letters, were evaluated and compared with the Pinxit Mea letters, which reproduce the same specificities. Let's say that the codexes reinforced our conviction that Pinxit Mea was very likely written by Leonardo himself.
If Leonardo da Vinci was the author of the Pinxit Mea inscription, the Lucan portrait could indeed be his self-portrait. It portrays a man in his early 50s. The painter was born in 1452, and the Lucan portrait could have been painted around 1500. That year, Leonardo da Vinci was forced to leave Milan. War had started up again in Italy. King Louis XII's French army had invaded the Lombard city, causing the fall of his protector, Ludovico Sforza. Leonardo chose to return to Florence, the city where he had spent his first years of apprenticeship. He arrived in the spring of 1500. 20 years had gone by. The Tuscan city had changed a great deal. The Medicis were no longer in power. At 50, the artist had to start all over again. He hoped he would still find some support in Florence.
Very kindly, one of his friends, someone that he knew when he lived in Florence previously, Filippino Lippi, handed him a commission that he was given, the Virgin and Child with St. Anne, really helping him out financially, helping him find his feet in Florence and begin to remake his reputation. In some ways, what this little parable tells us is that the patrons were less concerned about who did it than they were about what was going to be in the painting. That they had a template, they had the idea of what they wanted in the altarpiece, and it might have been any one of a dozen people who could have done it for them.
Leonardo da Vinci never completed his altarpiece. he only did a preliminary sketch, which has unfortunately disappeared. But the artist worked his whole life on the theme of St. Anne, the Virgin and the Child. 2 ink drawings, a painting at the Louvre Museum, and lastly, a charcoal sketch enhanced with white, allow us to imagine what the first drawing must have looked like. The monks, awed by Leonardo da Vinci's preliminary drawing, decided to exhibit it publicly. All of Florence rushed to the Servite monastery. During these troubled times with wars starting up again, people came to pray to St. Anne, the patron saint of Florence. But they also came to admire the Tuscan painter's style. Until the Renaissance, art respected certain rules of representation that were dictated by religion. Faces painted without anatomic knowledge were stiff and codified in their attitude and features. They appeared on a background generally covered in gold, without perspective or landscapes.
We all know what Gothic statuary and Gothic painting looks like. But if you think then of what's happening in Florence in the 1400s and 1500s, is that they are now looking at humanity differently. We are not just religious souls waiting to die. We're not just waiting for heaven. We're living in this world. And therefore, the way we're going to present humanity is very different. We're going to individuate them, and we're also going to have them interacting. So what the painters are trying to achieve is a secular representation of humanity, where we see life and movement and vivacity.
This evolution brought with it a new perspective on painting, whereby the style became as important as the subject. Considered craftsmen up to this point, painters now entered the rank of artists.
And this is something that is a kind of a hinge moment or a pivotal moment in the history of art, because what Leonardo was saying is, I am not an artisan. I'm not merely working with my hands, I'm working with my mind as well. And painting, therefore, is not just a trade, it's art.
He was one of the first to demand creative freedom vis-à-vis his patrons, as witnessed in the painting The Virgin of the Rocks, commissioned in 1483 in Milan by the Confraternity of the Immaculate Conception.
Leonardo went away and worked for the next 9 months or a year and seems to have ripped up the contract because he painted something absolutely and completely different. He painted what he wanted to paint. And I think this is one of the first times in artistic history we've seen this, where an artist has laid out chapter and verse what he is to paint, and he completely ignored it. And when the dispute arose, Leonardo said, I, as the painter, as the artist, know the way this should be done, and you are wealthy businessmen, don't talk to me about art.
Painting is an intellectual process first and foremost, one which feeds off all sciences. It is a cosa mentale, a mental activity, as Leonardo da Vinci would say. Behind the softness and finesse of the characters and the enigmatic landscapes lies a body of knowledge and intellectual processes compiled before starting to paint.
He was interested in representation of reality, how I can make it that this painting looks as close as when I look in the world. This was his challenge.
How does one create the illusion of distance between elements? How can one represent the floating sensation that accompanies this distance? Leonardo da Vinci perfected Sfumato, a painting technique that blends the edges and allows the eye to move smoothly from foreground to background.
We can see the way he plays with the landscape background and gives us a very convincing representation of those hills fading away into the distance. Came up with a prescription of the color blues to use as you did distant hills, that for every mile or two of distance you should take away some of the blueness of it, reduce the tone of blue.
From the misty horizon of a landscape to the soft contours of a face, Sfumato delicately covers each element with a cloud of smoke, which creates a feeling of unity. There are no true lines in nature, and there should be none in painting.
You see it in Gioconda is perfect when you look at the original. You see how, with this layer technique of the oil, how he created these surfaces. It's all flying. It's all cloudy.
The attention paid to the painting of faces and bodies, combined with the artist's anatomical research, makes them look hugely realistic. The characters look like they're captured in a natural moment. Through a look that lights up or a faint smile, Leonardo da Vinci makes them seem incredibly alive. Can we find in the Lucan portrait these qualities associated with Leonardo da Vinci's painting? Is it possible that the man who painted the Mona Lisa also painted this portrait? Its dark palette is reminiscent of the other paintings by the Tuscan artist. If one compares the Mona Lisa with other portraits of his contemporaries, one is struck by the presence of chiaroscuro, which contrasts with the bright colours of Renaissance painters. When looking at the portrait from up close, one can admire the transparency of the skin, the little hollow of the cheeks, which implies a slight age-related drooping of the tissues. It is the mark of an artist who most certainly studied anatomy, like Leonardo da Vinci.
The acute attention to detail that the artist glorifies in this painting, the jaw muscles, including the slight indent in the cheek, the curls of the beard, practically drawn hair by hair with extraordinary care.
Especially the way the hair is painted. This is typically his quality.
But what most captures our attention in this portrait are the eyes. One is seized by this look that seems to follow the viewer wherever he may be standing. A gaze in motion, reminiscent of the Mona Lisa. Analysis of the Lucan portrait reveals similarities with Leonardo's painting style. If this painting were done by the Tuscan master, could it be a self-portrait? For 5 centuries, Leonardo da Vinci's appearance has been a never-ending subject of controversy. We know that the artist was born in Vinci, the Tuscan village that gave him his name. But his contemporaries left very few descriptions. The first biographies written by Paolo Giovio, the anonymous Malia Becchiano, or Giorgio Vasari are from the 16th century.
The only written descriptions we have of Leonardo da Vinci sadly come from people who had never met him, and in fact come from decades after his death. They're unanimous about how handsome he is, how he had long hair, how he had a beautiful curled beard, how he dressed incredibly well.
Other accounts enjoy depicting Leonardo da Vinci as a majestic scholar, the ideal of a wise man, a philosopher. This is why some people believe Raphael decided to give Plato Leonardo da Vinci's features in his fresco The School of Athens, painted in 1510 in the signature room at the Vatican. Pointing towards the sky, Plato/Leonardo embodies the humanist Renaissance thinker. He is positioned next to Aristotle, surrounded by major figures of ancient thinking whose faces are also borrowed from Italian artists, including Perugino, Bramante, or Michelangelo. The portrait in red chalk represents the artist with the features of an impenetrable old man. Until recently, it was considered to be the artist's only true self-portrait. This was the official representation of Leonardo's face. But a few years ago, it was discovered that this sketch was from around the 1490s, when Leonardo was only 30 years old. This cast doubt on the identity of the sitter. There remains the Windsor drawing. This profile portrait from around 1515 by Giovanni Francesco Melzi is the only pictorial evidence of Leonardo's appearance that hasn't been challenged. Leonardo da Vinci met Melzi in 1508. The young aristocrat from Milan wanted to learn to paint. The artist welcomed him as an apprentice in his workshop. Melzi stayed by his side for life. The question of Leonardo's face has always fascinated the art world. Some historians have ventured to say that the face of the Vitruvian man, or that of the young man in the Adoration of the Magi, belongs to the artist. Recently, a drawing which might be a self-portrait of Leonardo da Vinci was found in the Codex on the Flights of Birds. However, this is all pure speculation. This is an enigma in which portrait and self-portrait, real and fake, face each other off in an endless game of mirrors.